All right, let's start off here and let's get into the discussion of the actual forecast and moving into the impacts. And we'll start on Thursday night in MetLife Stadium. You can see here that our core low pressure system is going to be pretty much off to the west of the Jets' home stadium here, MetLife Stadium. But what's happening here is you're actually getting a warm front that's going to lift up a lot of heavy precipitation up into the area, and you do see the tightening of those pressure bars indicating wind. So we're dealing with a heavy rain event throughout the duration of the game, and we're dealing with winds. And Sean created a nice image here to highlight the actual details of this game by quarter. And when we talk about risk, on Sean's weather risk scale here, we have essentially a maximum of around 3, I guess you could say here on the maximum on the y-axis here. But look at this. Every game here, that red bar is actually all the way up to the top here for each quarter. We're talking about an extreme weather event for the duration of the game here. And that's driven by both winds greater than 15 miles per hour. Actually, if you look at the wind forecast, winds are going to increase throughout the game to maybe about 17 miles per hour at the end of the game, with gusts generally in the upper 20s to begin and then ending in the upper 30s. So there's going to be some of those really strong whirls of wind across the stadium. And the real thing that Sean had here is that, as you can see as the game goes on, that game actually turns into more of a crosswind event. So that means when we say crosswind event, it's essentially wind blowing from one sideline to the other, not from one end zone to the other, right? So it's essentially coming across the field where you're essentially pushing the football towards the either sideline rather than allowing for the ball to either go deeper if it's a parallel wind or shorter, right? So this is Sean. This rating here is a 3.43, significant risk. So it's actually off your charts with regards to the extreme nature of this game.
Yeah, this was off the charts just because that, again, a couple things we look at is the duration. How long does the weather event last? And number 2 is how severe are the conditions? And the conditions were persistent enough and extreme enough throughout the entire game to kind of just send things into overdrive, essentially. This is definitely a game that we're concerned about. We're talking about a half an inch to maybe even an inch of rain during this game, so heavy rains.
Yeah, so Vegas, they put in over-under on this game. Let me just bring that up quickly here. The over-under is at 38 points right now. So it's already a low-scoring affair. So let's first off talk off with this type of event and similar events that we've seen when we take our historical database of weather events for football and points and try to understand where could the actual point end up here. So this is I'm going to zoom out here a little bit here. Sorry, it's my first day with the mouse. This is a chart that essentially shows normal conditions of total points scored and under normal conditions in this black chart here, where you can see the black line's the ensemble mean. That's about 45 points. In normal conditions like dome games, so just kind of giving a historical spread. And then you look at essentially similar conditions where we had a similar conditions of the forecast that's predicted for the Jets game here, and what the total outcome of those games were. And essentially each end of the bar is the one standard deviation mark. So typically we see points scored anywhere from 20 to 40. I think this is probably about 46 points here, with the ensemble mean around 33, which is pretty much about five points under the over-under today that's put out from Vegas, right?
Yeah, and typically what this is showing, right, just to kind of get to the heart of it, is in these conditions, on average, we see scores about 10 to 11 points below the kind of our control mean or games that are played in domes. So that is statistically significant, meaning that weather does play a factor with scoring and how many points are scored in the game, and we could see that kind of factored in as Mike already mentioned. This is a low over under of 38 points.
Yeah, and another way of looking at it too is also like, when you ask what is the actual probability that we can see under 38 points in this game? Well, if you look at this actual one standard deviation bar, or I guess you could say two standard deviations from the mean, it's probably around I would say probably about a 70% chance for an under here, just based off of the skew of the distribution.
Yeah, I mean, I use a z-score for this, Mike. If you actually scroll to the right a little bit, the chance of it being less than the Vegas is around almost 60%. Okay. So that's kind of the odds if you're looking at this based on historical probabilities. It's around a 60% of being less than the established 38.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so let's bring up the weather impact table. Let's take a look at the starting lineup here. It's at the top game. Third. Okay, so this is a big week for fantasy playoffs. We've seen Trevor Lawrence pretty much become a superstar this year. I think he's ranked in the inside the top 10 of quarterback production this year from any player. And we've seen big games out of Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram's been getting involved lately. They're going up against a really stout defense of the Jets. I think the Jets are giving up the 26th fewest points to opposing quarterbacks. Do you have any sort of sense of urgency here in trying to find alternative options here for these? Well, we'll get to the Jets player. Just give me a second. Let's talk about Jacksonville first.
The Jacksonville, it's tough, right? Because if you've been riding with Trevor Lawrence, you want to stick with him. He's been doing really great. He blew up Dallas last week, and he's been playing really well. As you said, he's really blossomed in the second half of the year. But we need to keep in mind that Trevor Lawrence, when he plays tough defenses, number one, he seems to struggle a little bit more, as one would expect against a tougher defense. But we actually do have him playing in a game with pretty bad conditions, actually not even quite as bad as these, but against Philly back in, I believe that was early October, and he had about 170 yards passing, 2 TDs, and 1 interception. You're going against another tough team in the Jets. They give up over the last 3 games around 180 yards to opposing QBs. So without weather, it's going to already be maybe a little bit tougher sledding for Trevor Lawrence. And my sentiment is this, right? If you're okay getting a average performance from a QB, like that's maybe all you're going to get from Trevor Lawrence in this game. But if you need a huge upside play, I think the probability of a big upside play for Trevor Lawrence in this is very much diminished. So like for me, I may have potentially lost Jalen Hurts from my playoff game. Do I want to go with Trevor Lawrence? Probably not, because I know the rest of my team isn't strong enough to really carry me. I may need to go with somebody else that has more upside, maybe even like a Gardner Minshew, where, he's not Jalen Hurts, but at least there's maybe a little bit more upside there.
So just to be clear, Sean, when you say he might have a normal game, you're talking about his is that what you expect, or is that what you think his ceiling is an average game?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify. I would say that's kind of his ceiling, right? Like, is it a potential that he goes out for 250 yards and 2 TDs? Yeah, potentially, but I think the probability of that is definitely diminished. Like, I think anywhere between 150 to 200 yards, maybe a touchdown or 2, is what we're looking at probably for Trevor Lawrence in this matchup. So you have to ask, like, hey, am I okay with that? And it could even be lower than that. You're going to be going up against Sauce Gardner and the Jets. You're probably going to have Christian Kirk going up against them. Zay Jones has been a hot target as well. But, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if these players had, 5-6 catches for 50, 60 yards, and that was their day. Yeah. It's also important to mention that in that game in Philly, I don't think there was a receiver that caught more than 4 passes in that game. Had more than 4 receptions. So
he only completed 11 passes that game.
Yeah,
lowest of the year.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
if you look at his Trevor Lawrence's production against top elite level defenses, he's gone against Philadelphia, Houston, Denver, and Dallas, who are all giving up, like a level of Jets type of production against quarterbacks, and he's underperformed, like significantly busted 3 out of those 4 games, sub 10 points. So, significant downside risk here with Trevor Lawrence and all the wide receiver corps, as you mentioned. I think you should find alternative options for those players.
Yeah, if you can. I mean, some of you may have been riding with Christian Kirk, right? Maybe if you're in a wide receiver 3 league, you have 3 wide receivers, maybe you don't have a better option. But, I think you need to really limit expectations going into this one. I mean, QBs on average score about 35 or pass for about 35 less yards in similar conditions. So again, like that ceiling is just really lowered in this game quite a bit. So, just set expectations if you're going in with the Christian Kirks, the Zay Jones, and the Trevor Lawrence.
Now let's get to the painful side of the story here. This is for me personally, the New York Jets. Now that we don't have Mike White, he's been ruled out yet again, another week. Sean and I had the pleasure of watching Zach Wilson man the offense last week, and you can tell you how fun that was for me. I think I could tell you I'm $20 less in the pocket. Anyway, so we have Zach Wilson starting yet again, and in an extreme weather event, if you have a brain in your head, you're probably not playing Zach Wilson, regardless. You're not listening to this podcast if you're that of a player to understand that. But I want to focus really on Garrett Wilson, because Garrett Wilson has been, he's a blossoming superstar, and we've seen him do okay with Zach Wilson. I mean, last week he had over 90 yards. So in this particular game, though, we have strong wind. We know that it's going to be heavy rain. We know Zach Wilson struggles a lot. He's going to make bad decisions. Do we have any sort of sense of playing Garrett Wilson this game?
I think what you're hoping for Garrett Wilson here is that one big play, right? You want that one big play that he breaks out and he scores the touchdown. I don't think you're going to get a lot of those opportunities, but you're counting on him getting one of those. Yeah. Because otherwise, I think it's kind of like a Christian Kirk thing. Typically QBs go to their trusted receivers, but typically the upside or the value of those receptions is diminished potentially a little bit, right? So as far as Garrett Wilson is concerned, if you're going out there and hoping for a big play, go for it. But I mean, Zach Wilson has struggled. He has. And in the one precip game we had, he was a 35% completion rate, 87 yards in that game, and 1 TD. I mean, that's just not going to get the job done. Now, the Jacksonville side, they give up over the last 3 games 270 yards passing. So could maybe Zach Wilson get something going? I don't know. In these conditions, it's just going to be really, really tough. So I don't think if you get that big play from Wilson, you're going to be happy. Yeah. Again, it's like the Christian Kirk thing. Hey, yeah, could he get 5-6 receptions for 50, 60 yards? Sure. If you're in a full PPR league, maybe that's good enough. But I don't know. If you have a Mike Williams or a Michael Pittman, I'd be looking in those directions this week.
Yeah, and in my playoff matchup this week, I have the luxury of having Garrett Wilson on my roster. I'm actually putting him on the bench this week. I think there's too much risk involved with this game for me to feel comfortable enough to actually start him. And my options on the wide receiver free agent list aren't great. I do have Gabe Davis on the bench. Gabe Davis is also going to be playing in a wind event in Chicago. It's not as extreme with regards to precipitation, though, in Chicago. But, he has a better quarterback, and I trust Josh Allen more so than I trust Zach Wilson in a slop fest of a game that's going to happen with this one. So just kind of showing you the guys that I would rank over Wilson. I would play Gabe Davis in this game over Garrett Wilson. I wasn't expecting to do that before I saw the weather event, to be honest.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think Garrett Wilson's going to get some targets here. It's just what he does with them, and I think it's going to be limited.
So what do we think about the running games here? With these types of events, heavy rain and wind, do we think that there's going to be a shift in the coaching strategy to rely more on the running backs and less on the passing game?
I mean, if I was coaching, I would, especially the Jets, I would definitely be relying more on with Xavier Knight, who's really blossomed the last several games. He had a tough matchup last week against Detroit. It basically been the best run defense over the last 3 games. But typically in these weather conditions, we see about 30, 35 more yards for our running backs and about 3 more opportunities. So I think he's going to get the opportunities with Michael Carter in this one. I'm starting Xavier Knight. I'm starting him in this matchup. The Jags allow around 130 yards on average. I think he's going to get some opportunities. He can break off big plays. We've seen him do it before. He's a powerful runner. I'm counting on that big play from him. I don't expect a ton of red zone opportunities in this game. I think we may see a couple more 3-and-outs than we typically experience just because of the weather. But I'm okay playing Knight in this one.
What about Travis Etienne? He's been having a tough schedule over the last 5 weeks, just playing top tier elite defenses against the run. The Jets are one of those types of really good defenses. Over the last 4 weeks, Etienne has scored sub 10 points 3 out of 4 weeks. He's scored his top scoring week this last week. It was 13 points against Dallas. We know that the Jets are going to be a good defense. They're ranked the 24th against the run. We know that this is going to be a wet game, so we may see the Jaguars rely on Etienne more. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, it's tough just because you brought it up, right? He's not been doing well of late, and the Jets in this kind of weather is a tough game to really get right.
Yeah.
So I'm hesitant. I'm hesitant with ETN. I mean, the Jets have been a little bit more susceptible of late through the run. They're not like a Detroit level over the last 3 games, but I'm definitely not excited. But you may not be in an opportunity if that's all you got, right? I think you just gotta hope that he breaks one off here. We've seen him do it before earlier this year. Where he has these big runs, like 50-yarders. And you got to kind of hope for one of those. Otherwise, you may be looking at like 3 yards per clip for Travis Etienne throughout this game.
Okay. Let's close up shop here and let's move focus to the big win game. Okay. So